Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Oblong Online. I'm Susanna Hermans of Oblong Books, independent booksellers in New York's Hudson Valley. Tonight, we are thrilled to host an event for the first 10 years by our local authors, Meg Bashwiner and Joseph Fink. Joseph and Meg have written a unique memoir in which each writes without consulting the other, revealing how marriage is not just a couple, but also two individuals, each experiencing and remembering their life a little bit differently than the other. Joseph Fink is the creator of the Welcome to Night Vale and Alice Isn't Dead podcasts. Meg Bashwiner is a writer, performer, producer, and tour manager. If you have questions for Meg or Joseph at any time during the presentation, you can either enter them in the chat on the right side of your screen or in the Ask a Question module at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address them at the end of the program. For those of you who'd like to purchase a signed copy of the first 10 years, there's a Buy the Book button at the bottom of your screen. Joseph and Meg are in conversation with Jeffrey Cranor, an author, playwright, and podcaster. He co-writes the podcast Welcome to Night Vale and Within the Wires. Welcome, Joseph, Meg, and Jeffrey. I'll hand things over to you.
Hello.
Thank you, Susanna.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Susanna. Hi, y'all. I realized that when I got onto this that I had last used Crowdcast for a Welcome to Night Vale something, so my name just says Welcome to Night Vale at the bottom.
Yeah, we were trying to figure out if that was you, and I'm like, it's definitely not him. I was very confident.
and then I remembered, I'm like, oh yeah, Welcome to Night Vale has a Crowdcast account. That's probably where he's logging in from.
Yep. So, and I don't know, I've only gotten good at Zoom over the last year, not Crowdcast, so I don't know how to change it. So you can call me Mr. Night Vale, or Welcome is fine, either way. So y'all, you wrote a book. You wrote a book together.
We did.
Yeah, I took your writing partner. Normally you guys write the books together, but
Oh my God, I feel cheated on.
you should. Well, you're cheating on Joseph with Janina for for your novel.
That's true. That's true.
This is the year we step out.
We're polyliterary. That's how we work in this family. So I'm really curious because so in writing this book, Joseph, when you and I first met and we started writing a play together before we started Night Vale, you had talked to me, we had talked before about that you hadn't really done a lot of collaborative writing. And then so now you've co-written a couple of books with me, and then now you've co-written one with Meg. Like, how has like your collaborative writing process sort of evolved? Like, how was this for you? This is a very different thing to write with some pal you have and to write with your wife.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I didn't have any collaborative process before I met you. I think I learned how to collaborate from you. We started working together on this thing, and I always thought that I didn't know that I wasn't good at working with other people. But I think I just had never really given it a real shot. With it, it's a little different, obviously, because like with you, we're working on things that are unified, and so the goal is to kind of have both of our writing dissolve into the same voice to the point where no one can tell where one starts and the other ends. And this one was about emphasizing the differences. So this one, I would say, was an easier collaborative process because any differences didn't have to be like discussed and figure out the way we want to move forward. The differences are sort of the point. The differences are like, great, there's a difference. Perfect, it's working.
Yeah, the differences are what make this type of story work so well. And I'm curious, Meg, because you and I both, were in the neo-futurist theater collective for many years, which is not really a collaborative writing process, but it's a collaborative theater making process. But oftentimes, like the writing, I think you and I are very similar in that we may have written a couple of plays with somebody else, but mostly it's just you go home and you don't go home and write it. You write it about 30 minutes before you're supposed to propose it while riding an L train. Mm-hmm.
It's better if you write it 40 minutes before, because that extra 10 minutes really
really does a lot.
Yeah.
How was this for you?
This was cool. This was cool because, yeah, as you said, with the performance, our theater collective, we would write plays together, but not really together. Mostly, you would just take something you know about someone else's life and turn that into a play with them, as opposed to like being kind of passing it back and forth. So yeah, so it was different, and then I felt like there was so much more agency because I could just tell my story at length and didn't necessarily need to find room for other people. I mean, because this is my story. That's the directive of the project, is each version told by each of us. So it was cool to get to just have my own voice go straight through. And yeah, it gave me a lot more breadth of ideas because I didn't really even have to collaborate. It really is. It's an interesting book because it's a co-author, but it's not sort of really not a collaboration.
Yeah, because it's about weaving together two separate narratives, and sometimes they touch and make, join together in unity, and sometimes they diverge in like interesting or comical ways. I've written so much with you, Joseph, and Meg. I'm familiar with your writing because of the Neo-Futurists, and also because you write all of the intros for our live shows, and you develop this really great rapport. But it's a different thing to see you to experience your work not performed, to like get to experience your work on the page, which is an entirely different thing. And it's like, to no surprise by me, it's hilarious. It's very, very funny. And I was telling y'all right before we started that it's really fun having known both of y'all since 2009. Maybe I think I met you in 2008, Meg. And there's so much in this book that I'm very familiar with, and then so much that I'm like, oh, I didn't know any of these bits because I'm not there in their day-to-day life. Were there and there were ones that just like jogged my memory that I hadn't thought of in a long time. But I was curious if y'all had moments of like surprise, like when you picked up when you read Meg's chapters, Joseph, or vice versa. Did you read something in there that you're like, I'd forgotten entirely about that, or that's a great moment, or I almost like, were there any aha moments for you in reading the other person's work?
Yeah, I was actually just going over this today because I was like looking for a section to read, and Joseph remembers our house hunting process way better than I do. He's like, and then the fourth house we looked at, that was this one, and I was kind of like, I don't know, I just kind of woke up and we live here, so. I don't remember what order it was that we looked at them. So yeah, it was kind of interesting to hear his version of those events, because it was such buying a house. It was buying our first house together. Is such a stressful thing, and his memories. I was definitely in the granular detail, as well as he was able to remember things that actually happened, as opposed to like. And then on this day, we got an email about the furnace, and on this, like, so yeah, his memory of that I found to be a nice refresh, actually. So, yeah,
for me, I think a lot of the earlier years of our relationship were super interesting because not necessarily like the events were startling, but just, both in your early 20s and in the early years of a relationship, I think you're very wrapped up in your own issues of like, how I'm feeling about this, worries about this. And it's very much from your point of view. And so I think really getting to re-experience those years with someone else's issues and worries and point of view is really interesting. It's just like a thing. It's not that it doesn't occur to you, but it's just not the central thing when you're in your early 20s. You're very much on your journey, and really, really thinking through what that journey is for someone else is something that I think takes a while to develop.
There was one moment in here. I'm just curious if you remembered this, obviously as well as Meg did, but it's just a very funny moment. It's a very Meg moment, but you'll both kind of talk about circling around how to ask big questions, especially at big moments early in the relationship. And as it got to like talking about the actual notion of marriage, but Meg, you had a thing about thinking about in downtown Hudson, New York, of how to ask this question, how to bring this up. And you're trying to find something creative, but also something maybe to like, allay some of the directness of a question like that. And so you said you were browsing in a bookstore, and I found a book with marriage in the title. I thought that maybe I could ask him that way because he loves books and I love prop comedy. But then ultimately you chickened out. Yeah, I audibly guffawed when I read that. That's very, very funny. Do you remember what the book was at all?
I think the question was like, it was like in the front window of the bookstore, but it was something like, should there be marriage? It was something that like would have, if I had just like showed him the book, he would have like, it would have sold. It was like very, I don't remember what the book was, but it was something that was like, it had a brown cover. It was an old book. It was an older book. It was an antique bookstore. And it said like, it was something like, should marriage exist or something like that. Was,
how to, this is from the 19th century, how to butcher a goose in marriage. I'm curious about like this writing, also in writing this book and like channeling like essay writing, because most of my work with you, and I think most of the people here tonight, like their familiarity with your work, Joseph, is fiction, not necessarily like personal narratives. I mean, obviously, I'm aware that both of y'all are capable of writing these sorts of personal narratives, but I would start with you, Meg, because I am so interested in like comedic writing. And I was just curious if you had some inspiration for like why you've leaned toward comedy. Do you just feel like a naturally like I want to be a funny person, or were there like writers or comedians or funny people that kind of inspired that approach?
I've definitely been inspired by comedians over the years. Growing up, I loved comedy. I listened to a lot of George Carlin. That was kind of like before I had a 6 CD changer and put all of George Carlin's albums into it and would fall asleep to just kind of the rotation of that. So I always really liked his specific approach to talking about things, talking about big issues and important issues, but making them accessible through the lens of comedy, which is something that as a writer, I've really feel like that's my lane. Is I like to talk about big things, serious things, but I want them to still have humor in them, because I feel like humor is a really good touch point for humanity and unity. So that's my inspiration. Why I lean towards comedy is that I feel like it's easier for me personally to talk about big scary or big sad stuff if there's also some funny stuff. And then also just structurally, I'm like just conditioned to always be looking for a punchline. So whereas with Joseph's writing, when I look at his essays, I'm like, these words are so beautiful, and he's really crafting an image and a scene and a moment. Whereas I'm like, where's the punchline? How do I put a bow on this paragraph? So so there is that sort of, you can see that he's a words guy, like very much a words and a fiction and a craft thing. And I'm a craft a joke, find a way to make this very tough issue funny. Sometimes it's, you undercut what you're saying, but sometimes it doesn't. So yeah.
Follow up to that for you, Meg, because I know, and you mentioned in this book too, but I know that you're hugely inspired by Gilda Radner, just in life and in comedy. Like, what is it about Gilda Radner, like of old, like 1970s Saturday Night Live fame, that has inspired you so much?
For me, I mean, she's very funny, renowned as funny, great physical comedy. But my first kind of exposure to Gilda was through her books, actually, and through the play Bunny Bunny, written by Alan Zweibel, about their relationship. So you get to kind of got to know her personally before I really got into watching her do Gilda Live and watching her on SNL and seeing all that stuff. So my access point for Gilda and why I loved her so much is that she had a very real story that she told, and her friend told a very real story about her life. And everything they said about her was that she was so funny. But when you read her book, you can see that she was so funny, but also that there was a lot of pain and trauma there that she was very open about sharing, which I find that really compelling, especially as I would think I got really into Gilda when I was like 16 or 17. So you have those big feelings at that time, and things are really intense for you. So connecting to Gilda's story is different than mine, but she was very open about her big struggles and big issues, but also it was hilarious. And so that's one of the reasons I love Gilda. Very talented.
She was very talented, and she had amazing hair.
Yes. Goofy.
Joseph, when I first met you through the Neo-Futurists, one of the things about the Neo-Futurists that is that you're required to tell stories about yourself. It has to be nonfiction, and it doesn't always have to be about you, but in that initial audition process, I remember that's when I met you for the first time. You came in and you performed a piece, and because it was like early 2009, I am blanking on exactly what the piece was, but it was a personal story, but it was told through something to do with planets.
I remember it. If you're talking about the very first thing I did, it was a series of firsts. It was like the first of a bunch of stuff, and I had them as cards, and people could just pull cards, and I would just tell the story of that first, which ranged from like little funny things to like really, really traumatic, sad things. That's my memory. That's the only thing I can think of that would maybe be like that.
Yeah. Maybe that was it. Maybe there was something in there about something to do with space that I was like, oh, he talked about space. And then somehow my brain just is like cataloging it. But I was going to say that from that piece, the thing that I do remember is that there's this kind of like collage of memories that happens. And I see it kind of still in your work now too. Like even with when you created that first episode of Night Vale, it's a series of short paragraphs. It's a series of like glimpses at a life, at a story, and I found that really, really fascinating. Has that often been like your approach to like, especially personal storytelling, is to take a bunch of like blocks, kind of build it in a modular fashion, or do you think more linearly?
That's really interesting. I think I've never thought through that for myself, but I do think that like I tend, especially writing nonfiction, I tend to approach it the way I remember it. And we don't tend to remember things as a linear narrative. We tend to remember them as these series of moments that are really about like what you were feeling in that moment. And so they get kind of strung together by the emotion rather than by any narrative logic. And if the emotions connect, it feels like those two memories belong together. I also think just on a pure practical level, I'm drawn to shorter bursts of things. You know, I've talked about before that I just like shorter chapters and things. And that's partly as a reader, but partly I just find it easier to manage as a writer. If I'm like, okay, this section is only this long, and that's easy. I can do that. Anyone could write 500 words. That's easy. I'm going to ignore the fact that I have to do that 500 more times. That's for future self. But like, I think breaking it down into these little moments is just an easier way for my brain to manage the writing.
So much about this book is watching two people, whether you know them well or whether you don't know them at all, is watching two people's their like lives change dramatically, which is and y'all's do in a very unique way, but also like in a not unique way either. I mean, going from like age 24 to 34 is just really dramatic. In fact, any 10 years of any life is super dramatic, whether it's like the body changing from age 5 to 15 or age 40 to 50. There's just so many things that can happen in a person's life in a decade, even though it feels so short. I'm sort of interested in about some of these the big sweeping changes that you guys have made in your life, and one of the more notable ones is talking about your sort of general fears in life. And Joseph, you from the moment I first met you, you had a profound fear of flying on airplanes, which I did too. And I'm just sort of curious about like, that seems to have changed a lot for you. Has that, and did you notice the change as it was happening?
I mean, yes, partly it was it's just exposure therapy, if that's a real thing and not just like a thing they did to people in the 80s. I'm not clear on that, but I mean, it's like, I've before the pandemic, for my work, I was getting on a plane anywhere between 30 and 80 times a year. And so you have to figure out a way to manage that. I never have gotten completely over a fear of flying, in that, like, if the plane starts shaking, I get very nervous. And I always like to be in the window seat because I like to see where I am in relation to the ground at all times. I prefer to be able to look. Oh, when the plane starts shaking, I like to be able to look at it and be like, oh, the ground's way down there. We have plenty of time. It also is, I think I just learned how to manage fear because I had such severe anxiety about everything. I just had severe anxiety all the time. And I got really good at partly this is a bad thing. I mean, partly I got really good at just burying that and sort of functioning despite it, sort of playing a part of myself to kind of cover the fact that I was having a panic attack. But it just gives you the skill set to be like, even though I'm afraid of flying, I'm going to calmly grab my backpack and walk on this plane and sit in my seat and read a book or whatever. Like, you just learn how to separate the fear from just the series of actions your body is going to do.
You have, obviously, once your career started changing and Night Vale touring took off and all of that, and you have to be on a plane all the time, like, obviously, like, you're going to find a way to adapt to that, because you can't have your body just knows it can't actually muster the energy for a panic attack every other day. But there's also this I also find it interesting, kind of in the confines of reading this book and rethinking about these fears, is that because throughout the entire book, Meg is with you, like, literally on the pages. Like, after a few pages, suddenly Meg is telling me the story, but also, like, Meg is in every part of the stories you tell. And this is a weirdly deep question that may not have, like, an interesting answer. I don't know, but do you feel like Meg jostles free anxieties from you and makes you face those? Is that like, I think about marriage in that way, because, like, there's once you have a person living with you at all times, you're forced to confront a lot about yourself that you don't do when you live on your own.
It's super interesting. I don't think she, like, brings forth anxieties I wouldn't have had otherwise, just because.
Well, I don't mean she creates them. Just. Well,
no, I mean, like,
yeah,
but like,
yeah.
I don't think she, like. Yeah, I feel like the issue is that I'm anxious about everything all the time, and some things are more focal points. I do think it's helpful to have someone you can, like, take turns with being the one who's together. That's very helpful, like, because we both had issues over the years, and it's helpful for at least one of us to be the one who's like, it's fine, it's okay. I remember there was a time I was hanging out with my mom, and my heart just started pounding in this weird way. Like, I felt like something physically was very wrong, and I called Meg, and as soon as she picked up, I was fine. And so sometimes you do just need the person who's together. The trick there is always just you can't both fall apart at the same time.
Yeah.
Which sort of becomes a thing, though, because that you both can't fall apart at the same time. So even if the two of you are going through something, you kind of have to be like, I got to be strong for the other person. So it is sort of a give and a take, right? I definitely have my moments where he needs to be the guy, especially over this past year. He's definitely needed to be the soother of the anxieties as opposed to the soothie. So it is a two-way street there. But a lot of the times when he's having an anxious moment, I just try to stay really calm, because sometimes things are scary for me too, but I know that I'm not going to be helping the situation by also being anxious, and I can calm him down by staying calm.
It has an interesting effect because, like, yeah, in this last year, Meg's anxiety has gotten worse, and the result of that is that my anxiety is less of a thing, not because it's not there, but it's just I have to be the role of the one who's together in some of those moments. And so you just kind of, your anxiety gets set aside because you have to play that role in the relationship.
Yeah.
The relationship doesn't allow you to tip one way only.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like taking care of horses,
If there's one thing to take from tonight, it's that relationships are like taking care of horses.
Yeah, your demeanor is very important. Whether you realize that the horse knows. So
the key to a good relationship is just to stand back from it like 10 feet, nervous that it's going to kick you in the face.
Just be really confident and calm.
Seamus asks a question that I was excited to get to in this because I remember this show, but they asked about the play Pro-Life. You mentioned early on in this book, I think it was in 2010, right? When you did this play, Meg?
Really early on, yeah.
Yeah.
And this was a gift that Joseph, you wanted to write a play for Meg to perform, and Meg wanted to perform a play in New York in the East Village. Was it Theater for a New City? Was that where you guys were? And so you did. You wrote a 1-act play, and Meg, you performed this play. Can you talk a little bit about maybe just the process of creating the play? How did that go?
I'll start with the writing and then hand it off to Meg. But it started like it was directly about my anxiety. Like I started to have the severe anxiety. I started to write the stuff about it, and then I realized I could turn it into a play for her to perform. Honestly, the main thing I just want to say here is nothing, I think, reveals to me more of the obnoxiousness of my 23-year-old self than the fact that I sincerely felt it was artistically important that it be called pro-life, even though it has nothing to do with abortion, and I could not be dissuaded from that. It absolutely had to be called pro-life. I don't even remember why. It just was so artistically important to me that it be called pro-life, even though the play had literally nothing to do with abortion.
And it made it so that we always had to say it has nothing to do with abortion. And that I had to also put that on my resume. Could never put it on my resume because I'm like, what downtown weirdo theater company is going to hire me if they've seen that I've performed in a play called Pro-Life? It sounds like
a one-woman show.
Yes. So, that was the writing process. Jeffrey, you were involved in this play. You guest directed one of our rehearsals, and you gave us a lot of structure that we actually ended up using in the play. You were like, this needs any sort of shape to it. So here's a shape. And we were like, great, this is a good shape. So there was that kind of a collaborative process that at first it was because from the moment I met Joseph and we started looking at each other's writing and taking classes together, this was before we were dating, I knew that he was an excellent writer. So I always had complete confidence in that. I was never like, well, is the writing okay? No, the writing is always like better than good. So I was not concerned. I loved the play. I thought it was great on the page. It was the real headbutting kind of came into the directing it because Joseph wanted to direct it, but I was like a very snobby person about that because I had just graduated from theater school, which is a very important place where you learn very important things about the theater. So, and Joseph did not attend theater school. So I was definitely on my high horse about that. And so we had that kind of back and forth where I was like, I know better than you. And he was like, no, I know better than you. So which actually led to us bringing in outside directors like Jeffrey Cranor and Erica Livingston. So that helped. And then it was really cool. It was really cool to get to work on something. We were so young, and it was our real, like I think it was the first show I performed in New York City. So that was a big deal. That I was just a year or so out of college and was performing a original one-woman show in New York City that we had. Yeah, it was.
That you could never put on your resume. Yeah.
I could never put on my resume. No, it's okay. I don't need a resume anymore. It's fine.
One point of artistic disagreement about that play that is an interesting philosophical thing, because I do remember there was a thing where I wrote into the play a point where she screwed up a line. I thought there's just like a point. It's not like, or like she flubbed something, and I wrote it into the play, and she really, really did not want to do that because she's like, everyone's going to think I just screwed up. And my point was like, well, I don't care if they think you screwed up. Like, I want that. I like that moment where you screw up. And yeah, it's an interesting like philosophical thing of like, I guess kind of sacrificing your image for the play, but whether that's worth it of looking like you screwed up in your big New York debut, if that's an interesting moment on stage. I don't remember where we landed on that.
I definitely disagree, because whenever an actor screws up on stage, it makes the audience feel terrible. So I think that was hopefully my point of view at the time. It is definitely my point of view now.
I think your point of view at the time was, I don't want to look like I screw up.
Yeah, but now after years of spending time learning about how audiences work, it's the audience gets really uncomfortable when you're not in control.
It's actually a minor error on stage. If an actor flubs a line and keeps going, it feels like it makes you a little uncomfortable. If everything kind of goes wrong in a play and people kind of have to stop, or you see somebody really struggling. I once did a play in the Neo-Futurist that was sung, and I went completely up on my lines, and I was just, I don't, and I just finally said it out loud, like, I honestly cannot get this. I don't know what's supposed to happen right now. And nobody else knew my lines, and it was the most tense I'd ever been. But I looked out in the audience, and I remember seeing everybody like, you, like almost like you can do it, like almost like willing it with their muscles. And it's almost like an epic failure, or something that gets everyone on your side, but like a minor glitch in your performance makes everyone kind of resent you. So if you're gonna screw up on stage, you definitely want to do it in a profoundly awful way.
Yeah, I think also if you let the audience know that you're screwing up, and that you know that you're screwing up, and they know, like, and you all get on the same page, they will get on the same page with you and start rooting for you.
Yeah.
But if you are trying to not show how bad it's going on the inside, they feel that, and they're like, because but they don't have permission to root for you. But once you give them permission to root for you, it changes the big pivot.
All theater is a lie, and we're just pretending you're not lying to us. And once we see that, you reminded me it's a lie, we get all mad.
One of the things that really makes performing less scary is the fact that the audience is almost always on your side, and because they want to have a good time, and so they desperately want the show to be good, and so they really, like, they are very forgiving. The only times that's not true is magicians, which audiences I think are very adversarial to, and then also for some reason stand-up comedians. I feel like audiences are super unforgiving of mistakes in stand-up comedy.
Yeah, that, and the other one that I will add as number 3 on that list is musicians in a place that where people are trying to talk. Where I've watched a lot of people get mad at, like, somebody with a guitar at a restaurant that the restaurant has hired. You're just like, I don't know. It's just music, man. Just chill out. But they don't heckle. That's the other thing. And in comedy and magic, people start like talking back. It's really disturbing. So I'm really also interested in, like, as you guys have gone on, one of the things that struck me in reading this book is thinking about, like, how people fit together, and how they, there's the idea of, like, two people are just like perfect for each other. And I think when we assume that about something, we think they have the same interests or they have the same likes. And you do have a lot of the same interests, a lot of the same likes, and similar personalities in some way. But it's funny as you read the book, because the writing styles are so different, but it feels complementary, right? It feels like discovering that, like, cinnamon and cayenne go so well together. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's really fascinating when you have, like, layers of flavor in a curry or something like that, that you realize, like, I would have never put these things together. It's not like lobster and ice cream, where there's no way that's ever going to work. But I found this really interesting about how you two work through so many issues, and you lay that out on the page. Going back to your talking about pro-life, right? Like, this directorial experience of having fights and disagreements about whether Meg should mess up on stage. I don't want to mess up on stage. I don't want to do this, and bringing in outside directors to work through this. I mean, my first directorial thing was with friends in Northampton, Massachusetts. I did Willie Knows the Flu Season. Adam Smith was a fellow Neo Futurist. Adam Smith was part of that. I had never directed shit in my whole life. And everyone was very patient with me, and I was around a bunch of theater grads. And so there's a balance between, like, not having conflict and then having conflict. And I find really interesting the conflict in this book and the way the two of you change through that. But it doesn't always feel good. Do you feel like mostly every bit of conflict is a stride forward?
In the book or in our life?
Well, let's say into the book, but I think in some ways, like, it is your life, right? Like, do you feel... I would say in your own life, so I'm speaking broadly.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely are made stronger by the disagreements that we have gotten through, because we're still together, we still love each other. We argue pretty well. I find is that we try to just stick to the business of the argument and not get, like, we just try to deal with the problem and not attack each other's personal stuff and get too emotional about it, and try to just focus on this is what you think, this is what I think. How do I get you to think what I think? Or how do I come over to where you're thinking? Or how do we think about this in a new way? So, yeah. So learning how to argue with each other is something very, I think, very important in any sort of long-term relationship is how to respectfully disagree and also how to make big decisions. Because when you're making a big decision, there's obviously pros and cons and many different ways you can go with something. So figuring out how to be decisive together is, definitely has made us stronger over the years. But yeah, I don't believe necessarily in the concept of like a soulmate and everything is just perfect right from the jump. Like we just get along in every way, shape and form. And that's how I know this is good. Like that's not me. There's everyone who I have loved in my life. I have not had agreed with them 100% on anything, So, so I think the conflict definitely makes us better. But that's because we learned how to do it. We learned things the hard way, not too much the hard way. Like, I feel like we don't have any, like the reason we're still together is that it still feels worth it.
You haven't had any knife fights or anything like that.
No, he's never knifed. I mean, I was the one who dropped him on the stairs. So
sure. I'm curious if here's your, feel like this is like kind of a hypothetical question, but so in making this book, I'm like going back, if you 10 years ago, thinking about yourself from 10 years ago, if they caught a glimpse of you now, like what's the thing that's going to be like the most shocking to them? Like 2009 Joseph Fink sees 2021 Joseph Fink. What's going to throw him off the most? What is he going to be like? That's not real. This is an alt timeline, that this doesn't happen, or this is not who I am.
Like, this is such a, like, I guess, shallow thing. But honestly, I think 2009 me would be stunned that I'm still living on the East Coast. Because I had such a firm plan of, like, I'm going to move to New York for a maximum, no matter what, of 5 years, and then I'm moving back to California because I really feel connected to that place. And so, I think that this is such a shallow answer, but I honestly think 2009 me would be most surprised that I'm still living in New York State.
What about you, Meg?
Yeah, I mean, 2009 me was so different from how she lived her daily life. I think that most of it would be jarring. It would be like, oh, so you like to exercise for fun and you don't just like drink a bunch of whiskey and smoke a bunch of weed all the time. Like like that's your idea of a good time is watching like, watching Pose and falling asleep on the couch is your best night. Then also just we had both really wanted to be professional artists and have that be our job, but that's not something that happens for most people who want it. And so that is that's the biggest treat. That's the definitely the best part is that we have the lives that we wanted at 23.
Yeah. If you, if you were to, and so we're actually kind of flip-flopping that. So if 2021 Meg went back to 2009, and met 2009 Joseph, like what stands out to you the most in that, like rereading this and jostling all those memories? Like what is different? Like what would you see that's so the most different about 23-year-old Joseph?
23-year-old Joseph Joseph has always been incredibly ambitious, but he was so ambitious and so driven and had such blinders towards achieving his goals. And that in the sense that he was almost pretty stubborn about it. He's pretty stubborn about most things. But I think that, 2009 Joseph was, I loved him, obviously, but he had like kind of differences in socialization than he has today, differences in, I guess, just like manners, politeness, cleanliness, like neatness, not cleanliness. He was always showered, but like he did the laundry today and folded it and put that in a drawer. And that's like not something 2009 Joseph would have done. So many things. Yeah, totally, totally different. Who isn't a mess at 23, like all over the shop? But Joseph he was a social mess. He was a physical mess, but incredibly career driven.
Yeah.
So
how about you, Joseph, if you go and meet 2009 Meg Bashwiner?
I mean, one thing is I genuinely don't know how I dated a cigarette smoker for
Mhm.
how long was it? 4
I
years?
quit smoking at 20. The first day I was 26.
So 3 or 4
yeah.
years. So that, I think, going back to Meg constantly smelling like smoke would be a shock to the system, because sometimes I forget that she used to smoke. But I think also just as she was saying about herself, like 2009 Meg didn't just not care about a lot of the things that current Meg cares about. She was kind of dismissive of them. Like the idea that like, yeah, she was completely dismissive of like exercise. She was completely dismissive of I don't know, just like a lot of the things she really loves and cares about now were things that she actively kind of disliked or thought weren't important. And so having that kind of reversal, yeah, it would be really, I think, it's at this point 12 years and very different selves ago.
Yeah. So y'all, I only have like a couple questions left that I've written down. I'm sure I can easily think of more in my head, but if you have any, please throw them into the comments or the ask a question feature at the bottom right of your screen. So on your book cover, here, I'll hold it up for the people who haven't gotten it or seen it yet, but you have these taxidermied squirrels, which is lovely. Meg, this was, I think, your idea for the cover. You found this image to use, and it's such a great cover for this book. And it's also like knowing you guys, you mentioned it a few times in the book, but y'all are great lovers of taxidermied things, and it's things you can get a lot of in the Hudson River Valley. Why taxidermy?
This is something that we both don't know why. It's like one day I think we were just at a store and we saw a piece of taxidermy and we both were like,
a wolf.
It was a wolf. And we're like, that's really cool. We both agreed that it was cool. We had like a difference in aesthetics when we first got together. And when we started moving in together and living together and like building up life together, it was always, I thought one thing, he thought the other thing. But if we could find something that we agreed on, then that would be our style. And for some reason, a lot like we both find taxidermy really cool. I think it's because we both really like animals and really like nature. And we're kind of like specific about the taxidermy. Usually it does have to be older. We're not hunters in any way.
Right.
So we like to find it. And it's like more like art. It's like bringing nature inside. But yeah, it is this weird thing where we both really, it's a bizarre thing that we both like. And there's you can see there's a pheasant behind my head. And then for my birthday this year, and as like a congratulations on our book gift, Joseph got me some squirrels. Oh, hang on.
So I wanted to get her a gift for her first book.
Whoa.
And I wanted to get the one from the cover, which is straight up an image from a taxidermy site, like a taxidermy store. So I'm like, that's great. And then I went and that one had sold. And I was like, oh no, oh well. But then I did some Googling and it turns out squirrels in canoes is a very popular taxidermy subject. I don't know why.
Why?
And I managed to find at a taxidermy store in like Grand Rapids, I want to say, somewhere around there. They had an almost identical one. Like they're basically in the same pose. And so I grabbed that one instead.
I'm really curious for one of y'all's next books to be basically a nonfiction exploration as to why squirrels in canoes is such a popular taxidermy motif. Yeah, Seamus asks about Jenny Lawson. Yeah, Jenny Lawson is great. I love her, and she's so much fun. And her books are hilarious and interesting. And she's really obsessed with bad taxidermy, which is one of the things that makes her book covers pretty great. Because if you find a Jenny Lawson book, there's a good chance there's a really, really insane looking raccoon or something on the front cover of it. So I'm curious about you. You guys talk a lot in this book about travel, and I think it's an interesting kind of like underlying theme of this book, right? Because we talked earlier about 10 years is a lot of change in a single person's life, and then you have a lot of change in like two people's lives as a couple, and the travel becomes kind of a big point, a big turning point in each of your individual lives and your lives in this relationship. Can I just kind of want to leave this open. I have a few ideas of my own, but I want to leave it open to you guys too, because the three of us have loved sharing great travel stories. But maybe it's not a Night Vale touring story. Maybe it's another travel story. Maybe it's a trip to some place that you'd like to get into more detail. But is there a particular travel or tour story that stands out to you, good, bad, or ugly? Like some ones that I wrote down are just San Diego, in quotes. Also, I think Stockholm is always a great one. We also have like dealing with crisis on the road in Manchester and in Dallas, both with sick cast members. I don't know. I'm just gonna set that ball on the tee and see if one of y'all wants to run up and hit it.
Yeah, the adage about touring is that your worst day on the road becomes your best story. So we've had a couple worst days on the road. But the great thing about the way we've traveled with Night Vale and also the way that Joseph and I travel together is that it's that thing where you both can't fall apart at the same time. And the great thing about Night Vale is that there's like 8 of us. So there's usually someone who can step up and be the adult and be the guy, and we can kind of divide and conquer and problem solve pretty well together, which is a good skill. We have that skill, and then also the Night Vale crew has that skill as well. It's us against the tour as opposed to us against each other, which is a really good place to come at something that's big and tough. We've had some really good days. Stockholm, we had a really great time in Stockholm. We all fell in love with this city that just. I never thought in my life that I would go to Stockholm, and all of a sudden we were performing there, and we were staying at a hotel that was owned by one of the members of ABBA, and we were also performing at a lovely venue in that same hotel, and we had the night off, and they had a really good food, and then there was really good breakfast. We all got to kind of fall in love with Stockholm. But yeah, I mean, my worst day on the road, not the one where I had an emotional breakdown in the Burbank rental car, that's by far the worst day on the road. But my most recent one was I was in Vancouver, and I was like 6:00 in the morning. We had a flight, and I was going to get the van, and I went to get the van, and I opened up the back of the van and was loading stuff into it, getting things ready. And I was going to pull around at the front and pick everyone up. But the garage door hit the top of the van and just shattered the whole back windshield and just rained broken glass down onto me. And it's 6:30 in the morning. It's Vancouver. It's cold. I'm like hauling boxes, and I'm just standing in like a pile of broken glass. And so I was just like, okay, and just dusted it off and was like, we'll deal with it. And went into the hotel, and I was like, hi, your garage door just broke my car. And they were like, well, we'll handle it. We're Canadian. We're very polite about these things. It's not going to be an issue. Got everyone, pulled up to the front of the hotel. No one had known what happened. And people were like, hey, can we stop and get this for breakfast? I'm like, no, get in the car. Get in the car. They were like, get in the car. And then, that was like a really long day. And I didn't get a chance to shower or change before I had to be at the next stop. And so all day I was just like, shaking broken glass out of my hair and like out of my jeans. That's my most recent worst day on the road story.
Did they get that replaced, or did you have to drive with the broken out window?
I just drove to the airport, drove it back. It was a rental car, so I just drove it back to Hertz, and I was like, hi, this happened. This is the person at the hotel who said they would take care of it. This is her name and number. Then here's your van back. And I had to fight that with the hotel people and with the van people, but not that day. It wasn't going to be that day. We had to get to Calgary or wherever we were going next. So it was a problem for future Meg.
Sure.
Yeah.
I like to imagine myself as the person in line at the Hertz return, in the Hertz return line behind your van, just being like, Oh.
And me getting out of the van in cowboy boots and just shaking broken glass out of it.
Oh, I'm absolutely just judging the shit out of you is what I'm doing in line.
I talk about this story in the book. I mean, the thing about having a bad day on tour is that it's often like you're having a bad day in really extraordinary circumstances. Like you're having a bad day doing a thing that a lot of people dream of doing. And so there's this kind of balance where it can swing from really unpleasant to really amazing. And one that epitomizes that for me is Copenhagen. I think the first time we went there, it was this really, really rough series of days. I forget the circumstances. Meg, don't remind me. It doesn't matter. Why we had to drive from Stockholm to Oslo, which is like 8 hours. And then from the very next day from Oslo to Copenhagen, which is like another 7. And we're just doing these really, really long days. It was impossible to find lunch. Meg, can you stop doing that? Okay. It's very distracting. Sorry, she was scrolling through questions. It was really hard to find lunch. It was these really long days. We get to Copenhagen. The promoter had gotten us a room in the train station. It was like a hotel in the train station that was also under construction. Like there was like construction workers directly outside Meg and I's window. I think your room had a thing where if you ran the sink, the entire room started filling with water. The whole hotel smelled kind of like sewage. It was the worst possible day. But I like was looking at my phone and I realized we were directly across the street from, what's the name of that place?
Am I allowed to?
Yes, you're allowed to say.
Tivoli Gardens.
Tivoli Gardens, which is the world's first amusement park. And we, like, Meg and I, like, we're like, screw it. We're not going to sit around in this hotel. We dropped off our stuff and we walked over to Tivoli Gardens. And it was incredible. We, like, rode these rides and we rode that swing ride that, like, goes really high and swings you in a swing in a circle, which is not a ride we have ever ridden before or since that time. But it was just like, suddenly we were, 3 stories above Copenhagen at night, just like flying through the air. And it was really, really magical. And then afterwards we had to go back to the sewage hotel. And then we had to go to the theater and do the show where all of us were very grumpy because none of us had slept much. So it's just like this really interesting, like, swing back and forth.
Well, I'm going to get these last 3 questions here from our people joining us in the chat. So Jared asks, this is kind of an extension on a question I asked earlier about, was there anything the two of you explicitly remembered differently from the other and your history together? So, like, did you have any moments upon reading the other person's account where you were adamant about the other person remembering it incorrectly?
Oh, yeah. There was this specific story that he just told. Like, I remember why we had to drive. And like, I remember like how it was all going. And the hotel wasn't in the train station. It was next to
it. Absolutely was in the train station.
It was adjacent. Yeah.
See, Jeffrey remembers it as adjacent as well.
It was in the building. The buildings were connected.
Like little kind of details like that. There's nothing that's really huge and sweeping. That is like, mostly it is just the sort of like little discrepancies of when in the timeline something happened, where it happened, what we were doing while it happened. Like in 2011, we both talk about a conversation where we talked about how we wanted to maybe spend the rest of our lives together. I remember it in one location, he remembers it in another. So it's like sort of little things as opposed to like, we never got married. We never did this, but it is those little sort of details. And then also sometimes he remembers moments as really big and I don't remember them at all. So
I remember why we drove to Copenhagen. Do you want me to share what I remember of that? In planning that tour, we were looking at doing trains because in like Germany and stuff, it's very easy to do trains from place to place, and throughout Great Britain, you can take trains everywhere. And then we had looked at flights, but Joseph and I basically were like, look, it looks like we could do these drives in a day, and we had never really put together a tour before. And so we booked them as, we will just rent a van. It will be cheaper. And also then we won't have to fly. And so we'll just drive them, not taking into account that Google Maps lies, especially in Europe, about how long it takes to get from place to place. So we booked it as driving all the way. We never had had flights booked for that tour.
And also
That's how I remember it.
We couldn't get a car big enough because it was Europe. We were like, we'll just rent a van and we all fit in the van. But we couldn't get the biggest thing we could get was like a Tiguan. It was like a Volkswagen.
Yeah, we had to get double vans.
So we had to get 2 cars. So it was like the driving had to kind of be like there was more driving that needed to happen because we couldn't all just take turns on one van. We had to like take turns on 2 vans. So
yeah.
And it was, I want to say they were all manual. And Jeffrey,
that's right.
it was manual, right?
Yeah, I was me and Natalie driving.
So you guys had to do the entire 15 hours or so over the 2 days because no one else could drive the car.
Yep. Okay, so we have another question from Laura. Other than learning how to argue with each other, what is your best piece of relationship advice?
I say this one a lot. Ask for what you need. It's how to argue, but it's also how to communicate. If you need something from your partner, whether it is, I need you to be here in this moment for me because I'm going through something, or whether it is, I need you to remember to run the dishwasher, you have to say it out loud to them. They're not going to read your mind. They can love you so much, but they're not mind readers. And no matter how close you are and how tight your bond is, if you need something, you have to ask for it, and hopefully they can give it to you. And if not, then at least you know that the question's been asked and you're not waiting for them to do something that they don't know that they need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I said the same thing last night, but like a relationship is an active, continual thing. It's a thing you do, not a thing that is. And so treating it as such, treating it as a series of things you do, rather than just like this structure that exists outside of the two of you, I think is a more helpful way of thinking about it.
And Kevin asks how you write. Like, do you have a morning routine, an evening routine? Do you kind of both do your days writing and keep your evenings free? Do you kind of do a more like work schedule sort of thing?
Well, it depends on what we're writing. It depends on the deadline. So yeah, like we had mentioned at the beginning of this with the Neo-Futurist, it's like it's Tuesday, so it's the plays are due. So you're writing Tuesday morning, you're writing Monday night, you're writing until it's done, which is a great thing about deadlines. In this book, we had a little bit more time, so there was a breadth of things. So I like to kind of get my morning going, have breakfast, do like kind of tiny little admin things, and then write. And then go exercise. And then while I'm exercising, I can kind of solve the problems that I created while writing and figure out new things I want to do, and then come back to it after I've had a minute. I think for me, more time for editing and revision always makes better writing. So that's my process.
I wish I had a routine. Like in my ideal world, I sit down every morning and I write for 4 hours, and then I like take a leisurely walk in the woods. But it's just like the nature of this business is it's just, I write when I can, I write when I have time to, and I write the things that need to be written next. I have kind of this long list of like writing priorities. Basically, next thing up is this, get it done. Once that's done, start working on this. And in an ideal world, I like to write in the morning before I do other things, just because it's so hard to switch back from business brain to writing brain. But it's also a thing of like, this person needs to have a phone call, and the only time they can do it is at 10 a.m. And then you have another phone call at 2 p.m. So you do your 10 a.m. call, and then you just try to squeeze in some writing before your 2 p.m. call. There's often weeks lately where I don't have a single day without a phone call or a Zoom meeting or something. And it can be really tough to find the writing time. So a lot of it is just being like, well, it has to get done. So I guess this next hour is writing.
Yeah, that's very familiar. And finally, Mia asked, and we did this earlier. So I think knowing the layout of your home, that the easiest solution to this is to bring back the squirrels. But Mia wants to know, can you show us one of your iconic taxidermy animal heads? I don't think it's possible for you guys to get camera where you're at now on one of them.
I mean,
if it is, that'd be great.
I can bring you a gator head.
Please.
I could just pick that one up.
I would love that.
Yeah, I mean,
Mia says gator head will do. Thank you, Mia.
Gator head was the very first one we bought. It was just like your usual New Orleans like tourist trap thing. If they just every souvenir shop there sells gator heads, and we got one. I think this was the very first taxidermy we got.
That's so good. Where did y'all get that?
Some tourist shop in New Orleans. I genuinely like it was not a memorable one. They all sell them there.
It's everything Mia wanted it to be. So it's really great. And it really is. Well, thank you guys so much. This is really, really fun.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
Oh, absolutely. Thank y'all.
You guys, this was wonderful. Thank you all for being here with us. I have to share my memory of Joseph and Jeffrey. You guys were the last people to come into our store to sign books before we had to close down for the pandemic way back in last March. So I have such a warm and fuzzy feeling for you for that moment, because I remember being worried that like we weren't going to be able to ship all your books out. We were going to be able to keep our staff on to do that, and we did it. And it's really an honor to be your local bookstore, and we're so excited. You have more books coming out later this year. So stay tuned. So follow Oblong on all the social media. We'll make sure that you guys can all get your signed copies of everything. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much
everybody.
for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, y'all.